You're watching Eye on Africa. I'm James Creedon. These are our stories, our top stories from across the continent this evening. The fallout from the so-called Congo Files continues. Thousands of confidential UN documents relating to the assassination of two of its experts in DR Congo reveal government involvement. We'll talk to one of the journalists behind that story. Zimbabweans take to the streets en masse to express their exasperation with fuel shortages and rocketing inflation. And reggae makes it into the UNESCO World Heritage List. We'll hear from Ivory Coast's reggae star, Alpha Blondy. Thanks for watching France 24's Eye on Africa. Now, it's been dubbed the Congolese cover-up. The UN concluded that a random ambush was the reason why two of its own investigators were killed in DR Congo in March of last year. But evidence suggests that the American and the Swede working for the UN may have walked into a government trap. And worse, that the UN may have buried evidence suggesting the involvement of the Congolese authorities. Now, an investigation by 5 different media arrived at this conclusion. We're joined now from New York by Foreign Policy's COLUM LYNCH. COLUM, thanks very much for talking to us on Eye on Africa. Now, just to stick with the basics of this story for those watching who haven't followed it, what might the motivation have been on the Congolese side for killing these UN investigators, and why would the UN stand over a cover-up?
So at this point, we don't know categorically that the Congolese government did this, but there is a lot of circumstantial evidence pointing in that direction. The motive, I don't know what the motive is, but a lot of people in the UN think that they had a couple of motivations for having intervened in this process and sort of ordered the killing, and that was that they were uncovering evidence of massive crimes in the region that may have been linked to the government, and that was sort of one of the concerns, is that the government was trying to stop them from revealing whatever it is they might reveal.
Now, thousands of pages of UN documents were leaked. This is, I suppose, a lot of what your investigation was based on. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about how the documents came into your possession and how you worked with the other 4 media? Just a little bit about the process, if you like.
Yeah. So, I mean, the basics of the story was that Michael Sharp and Zaida Catalan were killed for the UN, investigating sort of violations of UN sanctions. So, there was initially there were a series of investigations at the time. The UN conducted a sort of board of inquiry to try to determine what happened, and the board of inquiry reached the conclusion that it was likely they had likely stumbled into a local militia, said that there was a possibility of a government role, and that was not really sort of centrally reflected in the BOI. It really focused on sort of security protocols, the highlighting lapses in decisions that had made by the 2 inspectors. And so what happened is that there had been other people looking at the case, UN police, other UN investigators, and they had reached a different conclusion. They were suspicious that the government might be involved. They had collected phone logs which linked people within the Congolese security forces to people who were guiding them into this region of the country where they were killed, and there was some concern that they might have been set up. Now, we obtained these documents through unidentified sources. We have thousands of pages of it, and it includes things like the police reports, the UN task force that was set up to look into this. We have access to the Board of Inquiry report itself, which was confidential. The video, which is a horrific, grisly video of the killing itself. We have obtained, transcripts of conversations between the UN investigators and the families of the 2 experts who were killed. I was approached by a couple of other reporters. Sonia Raleigh was a reporter for Radio France International, and she was close to the two who were killed. She knew them, and she's been very much following this case since the very beginning. And so we all came together,
of course, France
over the
24's
last few
sister
months and decided
radio
to
channel
work together and sort of pool our resources.
Right, RFI and Le Monde, the two French media involved in that. Just very quickly to finish with
Colin. They have played a central role in this.
How do you see this playing out now at the UN? Clearly there was dissatisfaction within UN ranks if this leak came from within, if you like. How do you see it playing out?
Well, I mean, the UN leadership, in terms of the Office of the Secretary General, have essentially defended their position. I mean, the way that this is likely to play out is that we will watch over the next couple of weeks and months a trial that's underway in Congo. The UN has a kind of legal team that is on the ground that has an advisory role for the Congolese military prosecutor. They will try to apply some pressure on the Congolese prosecutor to conduct a credible investigation. But this advisory team has very little real judicial power, investigative power, so they're somewhat limited. So everybody will look to see what the results of this is, and if they don't think it's credible, then there will be discussions on what steps to take next, whether it's possible to set up an independent international investigation or just to try and find ways to apply some sort of penalties on the government. Okay,
COLUM Lynch, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you so much for your thoughts. COLUM Lynch of Foreign Policy, one of the journalists who worked on the Congolese cover-up. Now, how to tackle the escalation of attacks by Boko Haram? That was the question as leaders from Chad, Nigeria, Niger and Cameroon gathered for talks in N'Djamena on Thursday. The meeting focused on the security situation in Lake Chad, a strategic area where the borders of 4 countries converge and where there has been a persistent resurgence of attacks in recent months. Let's take a listen to Nigeria's Minister of Defence, present at that meeting.
What so far has been done in the past 3 years, it was examined and a lot of issues were discussed, including how effective this multinational force should be done. Well, it could be achieved through the facilitation of the multinational joint by bringing all the countries that form the alliance to be more effective.
Now, peace and stability in Libya was on the agenda at a major meeting in the Sudanese capital, Khartoum, this Thursday. Foreign ministers of all neighbouring countries were present, as well as representatives of the Arab League and the African Union. France and Italy also sent envoys. In a statement, the foreign ministers of Libya's neighbouring countries reiterated their support for a peaceful political transition. They also rejected any foreign intervention in the country's internal affairs. Now, there was palpable anger across Zimbabwe today as thousands took to the streets in a nationwide protest over the country's economic collapse. President Emerson Mnangagwa's administration is under growing pressure 1 year after taking office, this after the removal of Robert Mugabe. Inflation spiked to over 20% in October. Let's take a listen to some of those protesters on the streets of Harare today.
We are demonstrating because the situation in Zimbabwe is now unbearable. Yeah, life is hard. It has been hard, but this time it's even worse. The Mugabe regime was better than this one.
We as young people, we need jobs. We need something tangible to do in order to look after our parents. But we're failing to do so just because of the economy.
Okay, and also amongst those protesters was the main opposition leader, Nelson Chamisa. He said on Thursday that life in Zimbabwe is now more difficult than under Mugabe. Tensions remain high after July's disputed election that Mnangagwa narrowly won. Here is Nelson Chamisa speaking a little earlier today.
We are not agreed on the president. There's a crisis of legitimacy. Mr. Mnangagwa, yes, was confirmed by the Constitutional Court, but we still have to resolve from a legitimate point of view the contestation around who was voted by the people.
To Burkina Faso next, where several thousands of people took to the streets of Ouagadougou on Thursday as workers went on a nationwide strike over higher fuel prices. Petrol and diesel prices have climbed 12% in 3 weeks, sparking a wave of protests in one of the world's poorest countries. A grassroots group, the National Coalition Against Costly Living, called for the strike action. Let's take a listen to some of the participants.
There is a dramatic increase in fuel prices. What the authorities have done is unacceptable. The population is already living in poverty. We demand a straightforward return to the old fuel prices.
First ministers must reduce their salaries. They are over the moon. They must come back down to earth.
Now, this Saturday is World AIDS Day, which aims to encourage people around the world to get tested for the HIV virus. Now, of the 40 million people living with HIV around the world, 25% are unaware of their status. UNAIDS estimates 66% of those with HIV are living in sub-Saharan Africa. There were 800,000 new cases in East and Southern Africa in 2017 alone. 3/4 of those cases were young women. But new rapid HIV tests are finally becoming more available. Nicolas Germain reports on developments in Rwanda.
This HIV self-testing kit has just gone on sale in Rwanda. Healthcare officials explained to the public how you need to swab your upper and lower gum for a saliva sample. The swab is then placed in a solution. Results are produced within 20 minutes. Unlike blood test kits, they can be read at home by the user.
It is one way to make sure that people have access to HIV testing. And as we know that HIV testing is an entry point to the HIV prevention in general, and it is an entry point for long-term HIV care and treatment.
According to official statistics, the HIV/AIDS prevalence rate in Rwanda among the general population has been at 3% for the past decade.
Rwandans are usually afraid of getting tested. They're afraid of having to go to the hospital. But I really like this kit because you can test yourself.
The kit is sold for $5, a cost that is high in a country where more than 60% of people live below the poverty line. The Health Ministry hopes the price will go down.
Looking at who needs it is still a major barrier to scale. Probably keep discussing with the manufacturers and also the programs and funders how we can do better on access part of it.
Some criticize the self-test kits. They say that those receiving a positive diagnosis at home will not get the same support as they would in a hospital. Despite this, several African countries, including Malawi, Kenya and South Africa, have already introduced them.
And fans of reggae will be pleased to hear that UNESCO has inscribed the music genre on its intangible cultural heritage list. The Paris-based UN agency said on Thursday that the Jamaican music represents a vehicle of social commentary and continues to provide a voice for all. The Afro-Caribbean origins of reggae have a big following around the world, not least of all in Africa. One star, Alpha Blondy of Ivory Coast, had this to say.
And in reggae music, I've been talking about the glory of God, the beauty of the human race, okay? Talking about all those things, injustice, all those things that, that harms our humanity, okay? So it's a great honor to be recognized by a big structure like the UN, like UNESCO. Okay, and we are very, very happy that at least some people were listening to the message. They were not only talking about the smoke, they're talking about the message.
All right, don't worry, be happy, and thanks for watching Eye on Africa. Do stay tuned.
Maidan Square in Kiev, Ukraine. The government has just authorized the police to open fire on pro-European protesters. The carnage leaves 80 people dead and hundreds wounded. That was 5 years ago. Today, our France 24 reporters are back in Kiev. What has become of the hopes of the protesters? Are the Ukrainians still fighting to join the European Union?
This week, we revisit Maidan, Independence Square in Kiev, Ukraine, for France 24.